Rosie, stop it. Rosie, what do you want? Rosie. What? I have to get off? Well, that I just did what you told me to do.
Hello, welcome to Adam Swartz Popitz presents The Bells.
Hear the sledges with the bells, silver bells. What a world of merriment their melody foretells. How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle in the icy air of night, while the stars that oversprinkle all the heavens seem to twinkle with a crystalline delight, keeping time, time, time in a sort of runic rhyme to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells.
Hear the mellow wedding bells, golden bells. What a world of happiness their harmony foretells. Through the balmy air of night, how they ring out their delight. From the molten golden notes, all in tune, what a ditty floats to the turtle dove that listens while she gloats on the moon. Oh, from out the sounding cells, what a gush of euphony voluminously wells! How it swells, how it dwells on the future, how it tells of the rapture that impels to the swinging and the ringing of the bells, 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 of the bells, 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 to the rhyming and the chiming of the bells.
Hear the loud alarm bells, brazen bells. What tale of terror now their turbulency tells. In the shattered ear of night, how they scream out their fright. Too much horrified to speak, they can only shriek, shriek, out of tune. In a clamorous appealing to the mercy of the fire. In a mad expostulation with the deaf and the frantic fire. Leaping higher, higher, higher. With a desperate desire and a resolute endeavor now to sit, or never, by the side of the pale-faced moon. Oh, the bells, 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 what a tale their terror tells of despair, how they clang and clash and roar. What a horror they outpour on the bosom of the palpitating air. Yet the ear, it fully knows, by the twanging and the clanging, how the danger ebbs and flows. Yet the ear distinctly tells, in the jangling and the wrangling, how the danger sinks and swells, by the sinking or the swelling in the anger of the bells, of the bells, of the bells, 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 in the clamor and the clangor of the bells.
Hear the tolling of the bells, iron bells! What a world of solemn thought their monody compels. In the silence of the night, how we shiver with affright at the melancholy meaning of their tone. For every sound that floats from the rust within their throats is a groan. And the people, the people, they that dwell up in the steeple, all alone, and who tolling, tolling, tolling in that muffled monotone, feel a glory in so rolling on the human heart a stone. They are neither man nor woman, they are neither brute nor human, they are ghouls! And their king it is who tolls as he rolls, 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 a paean from the bells, and his merry bosom swells with the paean of the bells, and he dances and he yells, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme to the paean of the bells, keeping time in a sort of runic rhyme to the throbbing of the bells, bells, to the sobbing of the bells, keeping time as he knells in a happy runic rhyme to the rolling of the bells, bells, to the tolling of the bells, bells, to the moaning and the groaning of the bells.
Excuse me. Hello? Excuse me, anybody here? Hi, my
Hello?
name is Miss Bell.
Ah!
I'm sorry, I was just ringing the doorbell.
Ah!
Sorry, I was wondering if anybody wanted to get some tacos
Ooh. Where?
from Taco Bell.
Ah!
I'm terribly sorry, excuse me.
Hello. Welcome to Adam Swartz Popit's The Bells.
Oh, hi everybody. We need to start over.
All right.
Sorry.
And welcome to Poe 2020. A big thank you to Edgar Allan Poe, Lenore Lost, Neville Moore, and Annabelle Lee for starting us off. One of the best things about doing this piece is not only bringing together people from all over the country and bringing some of our actors back that we haven't worked with or seen in a number of years, but we also get to see a number of different interpretations on Poe, and that's a lot of fun. And Bruce Clow will be doing bells for us a little later, and we'll take a look at a different one. So today we have 12 artists with us. I'm going to ask them to turn their screens on so everybody can wave and say hi. So we'll do our Brady Bunch moment. And as they come in. So tonight we have with us Elizabeth Bagley, Bruce Clow, Sarah Devon, Stephanie Gates, John Vickers-Jones, Randy Majore, Carrie Marcinkiewicz, Evan Marcinkiewicz, and Paul Marcinkiewicz, Laura Riley, Laura Waldeer, and Michael Waldeer. We'll also have joining us a little later, Anne Van Kuren and Van Dance Inc. We have another video from Adam Swartz Puppets, and I'm not sure if Kathy's around, and if she is, we'll get her to say hi at some point too. So you have Kathy Morrow and Adam Swartz there. And a big thank you to Laura Waldeer for those moon photos that we've been using for Poe for a number of years now in our opening. And my co-host tonight, Jim Colbert. All right, so tonight we're going to do a number of trivias, at least 10 rounds of trivia. If you are the winner at the end of the evening, there are a couple options for you. Number one is a little Edgar Allan Poe puppet. It is a finger puppet, but it is also a refrigerator magnet, so it sticks to things. We also have Poe bandages, and I don't have them here in front of me, but I also have playing cards that have Poe sayings on them. So here we go, round one of trivia. Poe is credited as creating a new profession. He was America's first well-known, what? Use your chat box to talk to us. Come on in. We'll see you in chat, and we'll be keeping score all night for you. And now I have to put my glasses on to read. You are close, so you actually have 2 answers in there. So I'm going to give you to the first one. Roger's with us tonight. He is our first professional writer. He is the first person to fight for and get paid for, and considered America's first professional writer. So Roger, that is 1 point for you. And some also say he's our first starving artist as well, officially. All right, first up tonight, we have got Dreamland, Haunted Palace, and Valley of the Unrest. So we'll see you in a few, and we'll start with our first set of poems.
Dreamland. By a route obscure and lonely, haunted by ill angels only, where an eidolon named Light on a black throne reigns upright, I have reached these lands but newly, from an ultimate dim Thule, from a wild, weird clime that lieth sublime, out of space, out of time. Bottomless vales and boundless floods, and chasms and caves in Titan woods, with forms that no man can discover for the tears that drip all over. Mountains toppling evermore into seas without a shore, seas that restlessly aspire, surging unto skies of fire. Lakes that endlessly outspread, their lone waters lone and dead, their still waters still and chilly, with the snows of the lulling lily. But the lakes that thus upspread, their lone waters lone and dead, their sad waters sad and chilly, with the snows of the lulling lily, by the mountains near the river, murmuring lowly, murmuring ever. By the gray woods, by the swamp, where the toad and the newt encamp, by the dismal tarns and pools where dwell the ghouls, by each spot the most unholy, in each nook most melancholy, there the traveler meets aghast, sheeted memories of the past, shrouded forms that start and sigh as they pass the wanderer by, white-robed forms of friends long given in agony to the earth and heaven. For the heart whose woes are legion, 'tis a peaceful, soothing region. For the spirit that walks in shadow, 'tis an El Dorado. But the traveler traveling through it may not, dare not openly view it. Never its mysteries are exposed to the weak human eye unclosed. So wills its king who hath forbid the uplifting of the fringed lid. And thus the sad soul that here passes beholds it but through darkened glasses. By a route obscure and lonely, haunted by ill angels only, where an eidolon named Night on a black throne reigns upright, I have wandered home but newly, from this ultimate dim Thule.
The Haunted Palace. In the greenest of our valleys, by good angels tenanted, once a fair and stately palace, radiant palace, reared its head. In the monarch thought's dominion it stood there, never seraph spread a pinion over fabric half so fair. Banners, yellow, glorious golden, on its roof did float and flow. All this, was in the olden time, long ago. And every gentle air that dallied in that sweet day, along the ramparts, plumed and pallid, a winged odor went away.
Wanderers in that happy valley, through 2 luminous windows, saw spirits moving musically to a lute's well-tuned law, round about a throne where, sitting, Porphyrogene, in state his glory well befitting, the ruler of the realm was seen. And all with pearl and ruby glowing was the fair palace door, through which came flowing, 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 and sparkling evermore, a troop of echoes whose sweet duty was but to sing, in voices of surpassing beauty, the wit and wisdom of their king.
But evil things in robes of sorrow assailed the monarch's high estate. Ah, let us mourn, for never morrow shall dawn upon him, desolate. And round about his home the glory that blushed and bloomed is a dim remembered story of the old time entombed. And travelers now, within that valley through the red-litten windows, see vast forms that move fantastically to a discordant melody. While, like a ghastly rapid river, through the pale door a hideous throng rush out forever, and laugh, but smile no more.
The Valley of Unrest. Once it smiled, a silent dell where the people did not dwell. They had gone into the wars, trusting to the mild-eyed stars, nightly from their azure towers to keep watch above the flowers, in the midst of which all day the red sunlight lazily lay. Now each visitor shall confess the sad valley's restlessness. Nothing there is motionless, nothing save the airs that brood over the magic solitude. Ah, by no wind are stirred those trees that palpitate like the chill seas around the misty Hybrides. Ah, by no wind those clouds are driven that rustle through the unquiet heaven uneasily from morn till even over the violets there that lie in myriad types of the human eye, over 3 lilies there that wave and weep above a nameless grave. They wave from out their vagrant tops, eternal dews come down in drops. They weep from off their delicate stems, perennial tears descend in gems.
That was Valley of the Unrest, read by Laura Waldeer. We also heard Haunted Palace, read by the Marcinkiewicz family, and Dreamland, read by Laurel Riley, kick things off. Well, it is time for some more Poe trivia with valuable prizes such as the Poe finger puppet, hermetically sealed, perfectly safe, and magnetic to boot. What did Poe call himself? This is based on a number of letters and Poe's signature. What did Poe call himself? Valuable prizes. And while you're ruminating on that, we do have some wonderful things coming up. Later, we'll have a community read on The Raven, closing out the evening, and some excellent readings in the meantime. Anyone want to take a guess on through chat? I know they're having some power issues up on campus right now. Anyone out in Facebook land, Cynthia?
I've not seen it yet.
Please take a guess. Take a wild guess. What did Poe call himself based on a number of letters that he wrote? Ooh, what do you think, Cynthia? How long do we keep this one open? Ah, the director says we must move things along because the show must go on and move forward. And she makes this frantic gesture to me.
Ask another one.
We're going to ask another one. At what age did Edgar Poe become Edgar Allan Poe? What age did Edgar Poe become Edgar Allan Poe? Again, valuable prizes to the winner tonight. You could have Poe bandages. Quoth the Raven, no more sores. Also Poe laying cards, which we do not have quite yet. Cynthia, are you monitoring?
I'm trying.
We're trying. Roger says chat appears to be disabled. Roger, can you try again? You go ahead and answer live. Marilyn, is Marilyn considered?
I don't know which Marilyn.
Well, we have the correct answer from Marilyn.
Okay.
All right. So Marilyn is the winner on that round. The answer is age 3. Edgar Poe became Edgar Allan Poe, I believe, when he was adopted. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Coming up next, we have To Helen, read by Paul. For Annie, read by Bruce. And Berenice, Berenice, read by Randy. So, and more Poe trivia to come.
To Helen. Helen, thy beauty is to me like those Nicean barks of yore, that gently o'er a perfumed sea the weary, way-worn wanderer bore to his own native shore. On desperate seas, long wont to roam, thy hyacinth hair, thy classic face, thy naiad airs have brought me home to the glory that was Greece and the grandeur that was Rome. Lo, in yon brilliant window niche, how statue-like I see thee stand, the agate lamp within thy hand. Ah, Psyche, from the regions which are Holy Land.
For Annie. Oh, thank heaven the crisis, the danger is past, and the lingering illness is over at last, and the fever called living is conquered at last. Sadly, I know I am shorn of my strength, and no muscle I move as I lie at full length, but no matter, I feel I am better at length. And I rest so composedly now in my bed that any beholder might fancy me dead, might start at beholding me, thinking me dead. The moaning and groaning, the sighing and sobbing are quieted now. But that horrible throbbing at heart, that horrible, horrible throbbing, the sickness, the nausea, the pitiless pain have ceased with the fever that maddened my brain, the fever called living that burned in my brain. And oh, of all the tortures that torture the worst, has abated the terrible torture of thirst. For the naphthaline river of passion accursed, I have drank of a water that quenches all thirst. Of a water that flows with a lullaby sound from a spring but a very few feet underground, from a cavern not very far down underground. And let it not be foolishly said that my room it is gloomy and narrow my bed, for man never slept in a different bed, and to sleep you must slumber in just such a bed. My tantalized spirit here blandly reposes, forgetting or never regretting its roses, its old agitations of myrtles and roses. For now, while so quietly lying, it fancies a holier odor about it, of pansies, a rosemary odor commingled with pansies, with rue and the beautiful Puritan pansies. And so it lies happily, bathing in many a dream of the truth and the beauty of Annie, drowned in a bath of the tresses of Annie. She tenderly kissed me, she fondly caressed, and then I fell gently to sleep on her breast, deeply to sleep from the heaven of her breast. When the light was extinguished, she covered me warm, and she prayed to the angels to keep me from harm, to the queen of the angels to shield me from harm. And I lie so composedly now in my bed, knowing her love, that you fancy me dead. And I rest so contentedly now in my bed, with her love at my breast, that you fancy me dead, that you shudder to look at me, thinking me dead. For my heart, it is brighter than all of the many stars in the sky, for it sparkles with Annie. It glows with the light of the love of my Annie, with the thought of the light of the eyes of my Annie.
Berenice. Was it my own excited imagination? Or the gray draperies which fell around her figure that caused in it so vacillating and indistinct an outline? I could not tell. She spoke no word, and I, not for words could I have uttered a syllable. An icy chill ran through my frame, a consuming curiosity pervaded in my soul. I remained for some time with my eyes riveted upon her person. Not one vestige of the former being lurked in any single line of the contour. The forehead was high, very pale. The once jetty hair fell partially over it and overshadowed the hollow temples, now of a vivid yellow. The eyes were lifeless and lusterless, and I shrank involuntarily from their glassy stare to the contemplation of the thin and shrunken lips. They parted, and in a smile of peculiar meaning, the teeth of the changed Berenice disclosed themselves slowly to my view. The teeth! They were here and there and everywhere, visibly and palpably before me, long and narrow and excessively white, with the pale lips writhing about them, as in the very moment of their first terrible development. Then came the fury of my monomania, and I struggled in vain against its strange and irresistible influence. I had no thoughts but for the teeth. For these I longed with a frenzied desire. I held them in every light. I turned them in every attitude. I dwelt upon their peculiarities. I shuddered as I assigned to them in imagination a sensitive and sentient power. Here was the idiotic thought that destroyed me. It was that I coveted them so madly. I felt that their possession could alone restore me to peace and giving me back to reason. Evening closed in upon me, and the days again dawned, and still the phantasma of the teeth maintained its terrible ascendancy. At length there broke in upon my dreams a sound and cries of troubled voices. I found a servant maiden who told me that Berenice was no more. She had been seized with epilepsy in the early morning. Now at the closing of the night, the grave was ready for its tenant, and all the preparations for burial completed. I find myself sitting in the library, alone. It's midnight, and I am well aware that Berenice has been interned since the setting of the sun. I now have these hideous and unintelligible recollections There was a shrill, piercing shriek of a female voice ringing in my ears. I have done a deed. What was it? There at my door, my servant, speaking in a tremulous, husky, and low voice, he tells me of a wild cry disturbing the silence of the night, and a search in the direction of a violated grave, a disfigured body discovered upon its margin, and shrouded yet still breathing, still palpitating, still alive. He points to my garments. They are muddy and clotted with gore. I say nothing, and he takes me by the hand, but it is still indented with the impressions of human nails. He directs my attention to some object against the wall. I looked at it for some minutes. It was a spade.
All right, it is time for a little bit more Poe trivia with valuable prizes such as Poe bandages and our magnetic finger puppet, Edgar Allan Poe, who just can't seem to stick himself away from our bandages. We also have Poe laying cards for the winner of your choice of these prizes for the winner of tonight's trivia. So feel free to just take a wild guess on any of these if you don't know. In his early 20s, Edgar Allan Poe was kicked out of what institution? Early 20s, what institution was Edgar Allan Poe kicked out of? And please just take a guess if you don't know. It was not Boston U. Oh, Roger is correct with West Point. So the U.S. Military Academy at West Point said nevermore to Mr. Poe. All right, coming up next, we have Hop Frog, read by Evan, and then John Vickers Jones will read The Fall of the House of Usher. Thank you for tuning in and spending part of your Saturday evening with us here.
From Hop Frog. This story is about a king who is a court jester named Hop Frog. The king forces the jester to drink wine, even though he knows it will make him crazy and sick. In the end, the jester destroys the king. When we read this story, it's easy to believe that Poe knew his alcohol addiction was bad for him, and that he wished, like little Hop Frog, that he could get rid of it. "Come here, Hop Frog," said the king. "Swallow this, and then let us have the benefit of your invention. We want characters, man, something novel. We are wearied with this everlasting sameness. Come drink, the wine will brighten your wits." The command to drink forced tears to Hop Frog's eyes. Bitter drops fell into the goblet as he took it, humbly, from the hand of the tyrant. "Ha ha ha!" roared the king, as the jester reluctantly drained the beaker. Poor fellow. Hop Frog's large eyes gleamed. He placed the goblet nervously on the table and looked round upon the company with a half-insane stare.
Jim?
John, are you ready?
I'm ready. The video is not. It says that you have stopped the video. There you go. The House of Usher. It was a dull, dark, and soundless day when I found myself within the view of the melancholy House of Usher. There was an iciness, a sinking, a sickening of the heart. What was it? What was it that so unnerved me in the contemplation of the House of Usher? Its proprietor, Roderick Usher, had been one of my companions in childhood, but many years had elapsed since our last meeting. A letter, however, had lately reached me, a letter from him. He spoke of an acute bodily illness, a mental disorder which oppressed him, and of an earnest desire to see me, and so I could not really say no. I'd learned a very remarkable fact, that the entire family lay in the direct line of descent. It was this deficiency, this undeviating transmission from sire to son, that the title of the estate, House of Usher, meant both the family and the family mansion. When I arrived, I entered into a Gothic archway of the hall, and the valet ushered me into the presence of his master. Usher himself rose from a sofa, greeted me with a vivacious warmth, which had so much in it. I at first thought it was an overdone cordiality. However, his countenance convinced me he was perfectly sincere. We sat down, and for some moments he spoke not. Surely, man had never before so terribly altered as had Roderick Usher. He had a ghastly pallor of the skin. His silken hair had been suffered to grow all unheeded, and in its wild gossamer texture, it floated rather than fell about the face. I could not connect its arabesque expression with any idea of simple humanity. When he spoke, it was incoherent. He possessed an excessive nervous agitation. His voice varied rapidly from tremulous indecision to energetic concision, an abrupt, weighty, unhurried, and hollow sounding enunciation. He spoke of the object of my visit and the nature of his malady. I need your help to find a remedy. I suffer from a morbid acuteness of the senses. I can wear only garments of a certain texture, and the odors of all flowers are oppressive. My eyes are tortured by even a faint light and sounds. Only the sounds from stringed instruments do not horrify me. I shall perish. I must perish in this deplorable folly. I dread the events of the future, not in themselves, but in their results. I have no abhorrence of danger, except in its absolute effect, in terror. In this unnerved, in this pitiable condition, I feel that the period will sooner or later arrive when I must abandon life and reason altogether. In some struggle with a grim phantasm, fear. He admitted that most of his gloom could be traced to the severe and long-continued illness of his tenderly beloved sister, Lady Madeline, his sole companion for long years, his last and only relative on earth. The deceased will leave me the last of the ancient race of the Ushers. Lady Madeline's cataleptic condition had long baffled her physicians. On the evening I arrived, she succumbed to the prostrating power of her destroyer and took to her bed, and I learned that the glimpse I'd obtained of her would thus probably be the last that the lady, at least while living, would be seen no more. For several days we did not mention Lady Madeline. I busied my earnest endeavors to alleviate the melancholy of my friend. We painted and read together. I listened to his wild improvisations on his guitar. I can't stop them from ever ringing in my ears. One evening, he informed me that Lady Madeline had died. He said he intended to preserve her corpse for a fortnight in one of the vaults within the main walls of the building. I did not oppose this, since he said he did not want her corpse to be disturbed, so that her medical men could study her unusual malady. It seemed like a harmless precaution. Usher requested me to aid him in the arrangements for the temporary entombment. The body having been coffined, we two alone bore it to its rest. The vault in which we placed it was small, damp, and entirely without light, lying at great depth, immediately beneath that portion of the building in which I was in my own sleeping apartment. Before leaving the lady, we partially turned aside the lid of her coffin and looked upon her face. It was then that I saw there was a striking similitude between the brother and sister. Finally, he admitted that he and the deceased were twins. There was a mockery of a faint blush upon her bosom and her face. She possessed a suspiciously lingering smile upon her lip, which is so terrible in death. Days passed. An odd change came over the mental disorder of my friend. His ordinary manner vanished. His ordinary occupations neglected or forgotten. He roamed from chamber to chamber, and his pallor became a more ghastly hue. The luminositas of his eye had utterly gone out. A tremulous quaver habitually characterized his voice. It appeared as if he was keeping an oppressive secret, as if he heard some imaginary sounds, as if he were going mad. I began to be afraid. That night, upon retiring to bed late, I experienced the full power of such feelings. Sleep came not near my couch, while the hours waned and waned away. I struggled to reason off the nervousness, but my efforts were fruitless. A storm had begun to surround the house, and the howling wind disturbed me. An irrepressible tremor gradually pervaded over me. Through the pauses of the storm, I knew not why, I thought I heard certain low and indefinite sounds at long intervals. I knew not whence. I threw on my clothes and endeavored to calm myself by pacing rapidly to and fro through the apartment. I left it, and I found Usher rambling. Have you not seen it? You've not then seen it, but stay, you shall. I said, you must not. You shall not behold this. These appearances which bewilder you are merely electrical phenomena, not uncommon. I will read. I will read, and you shall listen, and so we will pass away this terrible night together. I took up the volume of The Mad Tryst of Sir Lancelot Canning. I tried to say it was a favorite of his, as I indulged a vague hope that by reading him the story, the hypochondriac might find relief. I read from the book. Ethelred, who was by nature of a doughty heart, and who was now mighty withal, uplifted his mace outright, and with blows he so cracked and ripped and tore all asunder. And then with his mace he struck upon the head of the dragon, which fell before him. The dragon gave up his pesty breath with a shriek, so horrid and harsh, and withal so piercing. I was by no means certain that he'd noticed the sounds that were coming from within the mansion, although a strange alteration had taken place in his demeanor. His lips trembled, his head dropped upon his breast. Yet I knew that he was not asleep from the wide and rigid opening of the eye. He rocked from side to side with a gentle yet constant and uniform sway. And then came a mighty, great and terrible ringing sound. And then with a terrible fear on his face, Usher began to speak. Not hear it, you say? Yes. I hear it and have heard it. Long, many minutes, many hours, many days have I heard it. Yet I dare not, oh pity me, I dare not speak. We put her living in the tomb. I now tell you that I heard her first feeble movements in the hollow coffin. I heard them many days ago, yet I dared not speak. And now tonight Ethelred, the breaking of the hermit's door and the death cry of the dragon, say rather the rendering of her coffin and the grating of the iron hinges of her prison, and the struggles within the coppered archway of the vault. Will she not be here anon? Is she not hurrying to upbraid me for my haste? Have I not heard her footsteps on the stair? Do I not distinguish that heavy and horrible beating of her heart? Madman, I tell you now that she stands without the door. Suddenly, the huge antique panel threw slowly back, and there did stand the lofty and enshrouded figure of the Lady Madeline of Usher. There was blood upon her white robes, and the evidence of some bitter struggle upon every portion of her emaciated frame. And for a moment she remained trembling and reeling to and fro, and then with a low moaning cry, she then fell heavily inward upon her brother. And in her violent and now final death agonies, bore him to the floor as a corpse, and a victim to the terrors that he had anticipated. I fled as quickly as possible, and I found myself crossing the old causeway, and then I stopped and looked back. And while I gazed back, the fissure on the building rapidly widened, and the entire orb of the satellite burst at once upon my sight, and the mighty walls rushed asunder. There was a long, tumultuous shouting sound like the voice of 1,000 waters and 1,000 voices of the past dead. The deep, dark waters of the Tarn closed silently over the fragments of the house of Usher.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for spending All Hallows Eve with us tonight. So we're going to go to another Poe question. Poetry in the pen runs in this family. Can you tell us how? And it's his sister and his brother. So any answers out there? And Facebook is now live and running with us. And of course, they always run a few minutes behind us. So we'll be checking that as well as our chat room. So does anyone know what his sister and or brother did? And it's all about poetry and the pen. Any guesses out there? I will do what I tell my students all the time is you have these things, you can't actually look answers up. When there we are, live on Facebook. Penn State did just score for anyone who's interested. It was a field goal. So the score is 14-3, unless something just happened while I got online here. So his brother was also a poet. William Henry Leonard Poe was a poet, and his sister Rosalie Poe taught penmanship and poetry. Oh, how much fun can we have? Okay, so moving next. We have Shadow, Silence. So we're taking a look at Poe's fables next in line, followed by Masque of the Red Death. And we have Carrie, Stephanie and Laura, and Elizabeth and Sarah. Enjoy.
Shadow, a parable. The year had been a year of terror, and of feelings more intense than terror, for which there is no name upon the earth. For many prodigies and signs had taken place, and far and wide over sea and land the black wings of the pestilence were spread abroad. To those, nevertheless, cunning in the stars, it was not unknown that the heavens wore an aspect of ill, and to me, among others, it was evident that now had arrived the alternation of that 794th year, when the peculiar spirit of the skies made itself manifest, not only in the physical orb of the earth, but in the souls, imaginations, and meditations of mankind. Within the walls of a noble hall we sat at night, a company of 7. And to our chamber there was no entrance save by a lofty door of brass, and the door, being of rare workmanship, was fastened from within. Black draperies, likewise, in the gloomy room, shut out from our view the moon, the lurid stars, and the peopleless streets. But the boding and the memory of evil, they would not be so excluded. There were things around us and about of which I can render no distinct account, things material and spiritual, heaviness in the atmosphere, a sense of suffocation, anxiety, and above all, that terrible state of existence when the senses are keenly living and awake, and meanwhile the powers of thought lie dormant. A dead weight hung upon us. It hung upon our limbs, upon the household furniture, upon the goblets from which we drank, and all things were depressed and borne down thereby. All things save only the flames of the 7 lamps which illumined our revel. Uprearing themselves in tall, slender lines of light, they thus remained burning, all pallid and motionless, and in the mirror which their luster formed upon the round table of ebony at which we sat, each of us beheld the pallor of his own countenance and the unquiet glare in the downcast eyes of his companions. Yet we laughed and were merry in our proper way, which was hysterical, and sang songs of Anacreon, which was madness, and drank deeply, although the purple wine reminded us of blood. For there was yet another tenant in our chamber. Dead, and at full length he lay enshrouded, the genius and the demon of the scene. Alas, he bore no portion in our mirth, save that his countenance, distorted with the plague, and his eyes, which in death had only but half extinguished the fire of the pestilence, seemed to take such interest in our merriment as the dead may haply take in the merriment of those who are to die. But although I felt the eyes of the departed were upon me, still I forced myself not to perceive the bitterness of their expression, and gazing down steadily into the depths of the ebony mirror, sang with a loud and sonorous voice. But gradually my songs, they ceased, and their echoes, rolling afar off among the sable draperies of the chamber, became weak, indistinguishable, and so faded away. And lo, from among those sable draperies, where the sounds of the song departed, there came forth a dark and undefined shadow. A shadow such as the moon, when low in heaven, might fashion from the figure of a man. But it was the shadow neither of a man, nor of God, nor of any familiar thing. And quivering a while among the draperies of the room, it at length rested in full view upon the surface of the door of brass. But the shadow was vague and formless and indefinite, and was the shadow neither of man nor God nor of any familiar thing. And the shadow rested upon the brazen doorway under the arch of the entablature of the door, and moved not, nor spoke any word, but there became stationary and remained. And the door whereupon the shadow rested was, if I remember aright, over against the feet of the young man enshrouded. But we, the 7 there assembled, having seen the shadow as it came out from among the draperies, dare not steadily behold it, but cast down our eyes and gazed continually into the depths of the mirror of ebony. And at length I, speaking some low words, demanded of the shadow its dwelling and its appellation. And the shadow answered, I am shadow. And then did we, the 7, start from our seats in horror and stand trembling and shuddering and aghast. For the tones in the voice of the shadow were not the tones of any one being, but of a multitude of beings, and varying in the cadences from syllable to syllable fell duskly upon our ears in the well-remembered and familiar accents of many thousand departed friends. Ye who read are still among the living, but I who write shall have long since gone my way into the region of shadows. For indeed, strange things shall happen, and secret things be known. And when seen, there will be some to disbelieve, and some to doubt, and yet a few who will find much to ponder upon. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow.
Silence, a fable.
Listen to me, said the demon as he placed his hand upon my head. There is a spot upon this accursed earth which thou hast never yet beheld, and if by any chance thou hast beheld it, it must have been in one of those vigorous dreams which come upon the brain of the sleeper who hath lain down to sleep among the forbidden sunbeams. The region of which I speak is a dreary region, and there is no quiet there, nor silence.
It was night, and the rain fell, and falling it was rain, but having fallen, it was blood. And I stood in the tall lilies, and the rain fell upon my head, and the lilies sighed one unto the other in the solemnity of their desolation.
And all at once the moon arose through the thin ghastly mist, and was crimson in color. And my eyes fell upon a huge gray rock which stood by the shore of the river. Upon its front were characters engraven in the stone, but I could not decipher them. As I turned to walk away, the moon shone with a fuller red, so I turned and I looked again upon the rock and upon the characters, and the characters were DESOLATION, desolation.
And I looked upwards, and there stood a man upon the summit of the rock. And I hid myself among the water lilies that I might discover the actions of the man. And the man was tall and stately in form, and the outline of his figure was indistinct. But his features were the features of a deity, for the mantle of the night and of the mist and of the moon and of the dew had left uncovered the features of his face. And his brow was lofty with thought, and his eye wild with care. And in the few furrows upon his cheek, I read the fables of sorrow and weariness and disgust with mankind and longing after solitude.
And I lay close within my covert and observed the actions of the man. And the man trembled in the solitude, but the night waned, and he sat upon the rock.
Then I cursed the elements with a curse of tumult, and a frightful tempest gathered in the heaven where before there had been no wind. And the heaven became livid with the violence of the tempest, and the rain beat down upon the head of the man, and the floods of the river came down, and the river was tormented into foam, and the forests crumbled before the wind, and the thunder rolled, and the lightning fell, and the rock rocked to its foundation. And I lay close within my covert and observed the actions of the man, and the man trembled in the solitude. But the night waned, and he sat upon the rock.
Then I grew angry and cursed with the curse of silence, the river and the lilies and the wind and the forest and the heaven. And they became accursed, and they were still. And the moon ceased to totter up its pathway to heaven, and the thunder died away, and the lightning did not flash, and the clouds hung motionless, and the waters sunk to their level and remained, and the trees ceased to rock, and the water lilies sighed no more. And the murmur was heard no longer from among them, nor any shadow of sound throughout the vast, illimitable desert. And I looked upon the characters of the rock, and they were changed. And the characters were SILENCE, silence.
And mine eyes fell upon the countenance of the man, and his countenance was wan with terror. And hurriedly he raised his head from his hand and stood forth upon the rock and listened. But there was no voice throughout the vast, illimitable desert, and the characters upon the rock were silence. And the man shuddered and turned his face away and fled afar off in haste, so that I beheld him no more.
And as the demon made an end of his story, he fell back within the cavity of the tomb and laughed. And I could not laugh with the demon, and he cursed me because I could not laugh. And the lynx, which dwelleth forever in the tomb, came out therefrom, and lay down at the feet of the demon, and looked him steadily in the face.
Ours is a world of words. Quiet we call silence, which is the merest word of all.
The Mask of the Red Death. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous.
Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores, with dissolution.
The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow man.
And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour.
But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys, which was amply provisioned, with such precautions that the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion.
The external world could take care of itself.
In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think.
It was towards the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within.
Without was the Red Death.
there stood upon the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang. And when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear, and loud, and deep, and exceedingly musical.
But of so peculiar a note and emphasis,
that, at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause, momentarily, in their performance, to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company.
it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation.
But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled, as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows that the next chiming of the clocks should produce in them no similar emotion.
It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as the madman fashions. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust.
And, anon, there strikes the ebony clock, and then, for a moment, all is still, and all is silent, save the voice of the clock. The revelers are stiff frozen as they stand.
But the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And the revel went whirlingly on, until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before.
But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus too it happened that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure, which had arrested the attention of no single individual before.
And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur of horror and of disgust.
The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny might have difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revelers around, but the member had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of his face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror.
When the eyes of the Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, he was seen to be convulsed, in the first moment with a strong shudder, either of horror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. Who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, and we may know who to hang at sunrise from the battlements. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of the group in the direction of the intruder, who, at the moment, with delicate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker.
But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth a hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way through uninterruptedly.
The Prince Prospero, maddened with rage, rushed hurriedly through the chamber,
while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all.
He bore aloft a drawn dagger and had approached it with rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure.
When the latter turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer.
There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet.
Upon which most instantly afterward fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero.
Then, summoning a wild courage of despair, the throng of revelers at once threw themselves into the apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask which they handled so violent a rudeness untenanted by any tangible form.
And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death.
He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died, each in the despairing posture of his fall.
And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay.
And the flames of the tripods expired.
And darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all.
It is time for Poe Trivia again, and you can win a valuable Poe pet, or your choice of Poe bandages or Poe laying cards. And yes, my Poe puns have a bit of a Poe-tina on them tonight, if you've joined us last night. Poe theorized a scientific premise 80 years before it became popular. Poe considered it his masterpiece. Can you give us either the scientific premise or theory or the title of the work? So, scientific premise 80 years before it became popular. And he considered it his masterpiece. Please chime in, take a guess if you like, grab your smartphones, or yell upstairs to your smarter spouse. Anyone? Any guesses? Any guesses on Facebook?
Not yet.
Our director says no guesses yet. Good guess, but not the Pit and the Pendulum. So perhaps a hint. Perhaps you would be familiar with this theory if you were a bare-naked lady. Does Poe approve? Constanza, indeed, the Big Bang Theory. And the work itself was Eureka, a prose poem. So very good. And Mr. Poe applauds you, dressed in his glorious purple overcoat and purple ascot. Coming up next, we have one of my personal favorite pieces. We're going to hear John Vickers-Jones read Annabel Lee. Then The Bells, done by Bruce, and another presentation from Adam Swartz Puppets. We'll hear them do The Raven. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Annabel Lee. It was many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child, and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea. But we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee. With a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long, long ago, in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee. So that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me. to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know, in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we. And neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea, can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee, and the stars, they never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so, all the night tide, I lie down by her side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea.
The bells. Hear the sledges with the bells, silver bells. What a world of merriment their melody foretells. How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle in the icy air of night, while the stars that oversprinkle all the heavens seem to twinkle with a crystalline delight. Keeping time, time, time in a sort of runic rhyme to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells. Hear the mellow wedding bells, golden bells. What a world of happiness their harmony foretells. Through the balmy air of night, how they ring out their delight from the molten golden notes, and all in tune. What a liquid ditty floats to the turtle dove that listens while she gloats on the moon. Oh, from out the sounding cells, what a gush of euphony voluminously wells, how it swells, how it dwells on the future, how it tells of the rapture that impels to the swinging and the ringing of the bells, 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 of the bells, 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 to the rhyming and the chiming of the bells. Hear the loud alarum bells, brazen bells. What a tale of terror now their turbulency tells. In the startled ear of night, how they scream out their affright. Too much horrified to speak, they can only shriek, shriek out of tune. In a clamorous appealing to the mercy of the fire, in a mad expostulation with the deaf and frantic fire, leaping higher, 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 with a desperate desire and a resolute endeavor now to sit or never by the side of the pale-faced moon. Oh, the bells, 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 what a tale their terror tells of despair. How they clang and clash and roar, what a horror they outpour. The bosom of the palpitating air, yet the ear it fully knows by the clanging and the clanging, how the danger ebbs and flows, yet the ear distinctly tells in the jangling and the wrangling, how the danger sinks and swells by the sinking or the swelling in the anger of the bells, of the bells, of the bells, 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 bells. in the clamor and the clangor of the bells. Hear the tolling of the bells, iron bells. What a world of solemn thought their monody compels. In the silence of the night, how we shiver with affright at the melancholy menace of their tone. For every sound that floats from the rust within their throats is a groan. And the people, oh, the people, they that dwell up in the steeple all alone, and who tolling, tolling, tolling in that muffled monotone, feel a glory in so rolling on the human heart a stone. They are neither man nor woman, they are neither brute nor human, they are ghouls. And it is their king who tolls, and he rolls, 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 rolls paean from the bells, and his merry bosom swells with the paean of the bells, and he dances and he yells, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme to the paean of the bells, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme to the throbbing of the bells, and the sobbing of the bells, keeping time, 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 as he knells, knells, knells in a happy runic rhyme to the rolling of the bells, and the tolling of the bells, 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 to the moaning and the groaning of the bells.
Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door.
"'Tis some visitor,"
I muttered,
tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more."
Ah, distinctly, I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating,
"'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more."
Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer.
"Sir,"
said I,
"or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you."
Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore?" This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before.
Surely,
said I,
surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more.
Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mane of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore.
Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou,
I said,
art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore.
Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast, upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered,
Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before.
Then the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken,
Doubtless,
said I,
what it uttered is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore.
But the raven, still beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then, upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease, reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloated o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then, methought, the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor.
Wretch,
I cried,
thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, O quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore.
Quoth the raven, nevermore.
Prophet,
said I,
thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempt or sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore.
Quoth the raven, nevermore.
Prophet,
said I,
thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if, within the distant Aidenn, it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore.
Quoth the raven, nevermore.
Be that word our sign in parting, bird or fiend.
I shrieked, upstarting.
Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door.
Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor.
And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore.
Time for a little more Poe trivia. Wasn't that Shadow Puppetry wonderful by Adam Swartz Puppets? Poe's first book of short stories was named what? First book of short stories by Edgar Allan Poe. Go on and take a guess if you don't know it. Or answer if you do. We'll be monitoring chat both on Facebook and through Zoom. So Poe's first book of short stories. Any guesses? Oh, no guesses. Should we wrap this one up to keep things moving, Cynthia? All right, we're going to wrap this one up since we have no guesses so far. Poe's first book of short stories was named what? Tales of the Grotesque and Arabesque. First book of short stories. Oh, coming up next, we're going to have Dreams read by Stephanie. We're going to have the cast of Amontillado read by Laura and Mike, and The Conqueror Worm read by Evan.
Dreams. Oh, that my young life were a lasting dream, my spirit not awakening till the beam of an eternity should bring the morrow. Yes, though that long dream were of hopeless sorrow, 'twere better than the cold reality of waking life, to him whose heart must be, and hath been still upon this lovely earth, a chaos of deep passion from his birth. But should it be, that dream eternally continuing, as dreams have been to me in my young boyhood, should it thus be given, 'twere folly still to hope for higher heaven. For I have reveled when the sun was bright in the summer sky, in dreams of living light and loveliness, have left my very heart in climes of mine imagining, apart from mine own home, with beings that have been of mine own thought. What more could I have seen? 'Twas once, and only once, and the wild hour from my remembrance shall not pass. Some power or spell had bound me. 'Twas the chilly wind came o'er me in the night, and left behind its image on my spirit, or the moon shone on my slumbers in her lofty noon, too coldly, or the stars. Howe'er it was, that dream was as that night wind. Let it pass. I have been happy, though but in a dream. I have been happy, and I love the theme, dreams, in their vivid coloring of life, as in that fleeting, shadowy, misty strife of semblance with reality, which brings to the delirious eye more lovely things of paradise and love and all our own than young Hope in his sunniest hour hath known.
Cask of Amontillado. We continued in search of the Amontillado. Fortunato's gait was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. And when he turned towards me, he looked into my eyes with two filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of his intoxication. We passed through low arches and, descending again, arrived at a deep crypt in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeau rather to glow than to flame. At the most remote end of the crypt, there appeared another, less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human bones piled to the vault overhead in the fashion of the catacombs of Paris. Within the wall, we perceived a still interior recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no special use, merely the interval between two colossal supports of the roof, and backed by one circumscribing wall of solid granite. He stepped unsteadily forward. I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant, he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had him fettered to the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. It was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. "The Amontillado!" ejaculated my friend.
True, I replied, the Amontillado. As I said these words, I busied myself by uncovering a quantity of building stone and mortar, and with these materials began vigorously to wall up the entrance of my niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of the masonry when I discovered that my friend's intoxication had in a great measure worn off. There was a low moaning cry from the depth of the recess, and then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the second tier, and the third, and the fourth, and then I heard the furious vibration of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed and finished without interruption the 5th, 6th, and the 7th tier. The wall was now nearly level upon with my breast. A sudden succession of loud and shrill screams, bursting from the throat of the chained form, thrust me violently back, and for a brief moment I hesitated, trembled. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs. Felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed, I aided, I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamorer grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th, and there remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. There came from out the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of my friend. A very good joke indeed, an excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo over our wine. Huh? Ah, yes, I said, the Amontillado. Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will they not be waiting for us at the palazzo? Let us be gone. Yes, let us be gone. For the love of God, Montresor. Yes, for the love of God. But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, Fortunato! No answer. I called again, Fortunato! No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells of his cap. I forced the last stone into position and plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. I drink to the buried that repose around us, and to your long life. In pace requiescat.
The Conqueror Worm. Lo, 'tis a gala night within the lonesome latter years, an angel throng, bewinged, bedight in veils and drowned in tears, sit in a theatre to see a play of hopes and fears, while the orchestra breathes fitfully the music of the spheres. Mimes in the form of God on high mutter and mumble low, and hither and thither fly, mere puppets, they who come and go at bidding of vast formless things that shift the scenery to and fro, flapping from out their condor wings invisible woe. Oh, that motley drama, be sure it shall not be forgot, with its phantom chased forevermore by a crowd that sees it not, through a circle that ever returneth into the selfsame spot, and much of madness and more of sin, and horror the soul of the plot. But see, amid the mimic rout, a crawling shape intrude, a blood-red thing that writhes from out the scenic solitude. It writhes with mortal pangs, the mimes become its food, and seraphs sob at vermin fangs and human gore imbued. Out are the lights, out all, and over each quivering form the curtain, a funeral pall, comes down with the rush of a storm, while the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that the play is the tragedy, man, and its hero, the Conqueror Worm.
And welcome back, everyone. So we're going to go to another trivia question here really quickly. Poe was most likely named after what Shakespearean character? So you can either name the play or name the character, if you can think about it. So it's a Shakespeare play that his parents were involved in. I need my glasses to monitor chat. That's really sad, isn't it? Yes, there is. Both Constance, we have two winners here today. So it is King Lear, and it's Edgar, who is the Earl of Gloucester's son in Lear. So we have awarding 2 points here. Yay. All right.
You saw those both come in at the same time.
Yep,
right?
that's why I said I just awarded 2 points, one to each of them. So I'm trying to see what else is up there. Did anyone else put in? There we go. Okay. And I'll monitor Facebook here in a sec. It's a few minutes behind, so I'll double check there as well. We're going to do a little bit of a switch here, and I hope my cast is paying attention because one of our company members just lost Wi-Fi in New Orleans. So I am jumping, guys. Hopefully they're all paying attention. Down to Alone with Elizabeth, The City in the Sea with Mike. Randy is back. And The Black Cat with Bruce. So we are going to jump back. So Alone with Elizabeth, The City in the Sea with Mike, and The Black Cat with Bruce. Thanks.
Alone. From childhood's hour I have not been as others were. I have not seen as others saw. I could not bring my passions from a common spring. From the same source I have not taken my sorrow. I could not awaken my heart to joy at the same tone, and all I loved alone. Then, in my childhood, in the dawn of a most stormy life, was drawn from every depth of good and ill the mystery which binds me still. From the torrent or of the fountain, from the cliff of the mountain, from the sun that round me rolled in its autumn tint of gold, from the lightning in the sky as it passed me flying by, from the thunder and the storm, and when the cloud that took the form, when the rest of heaven was blue, a demon in my view.
Lo, Death has reared himself a throne in a strange city lying alone. Far down within the dim west, where the good and the bad and the worst and the best have gone to their eternal rest. Their shrines and palaces and towers, time-eaten towers, and tremble not, resemble nothing that is ours. Around by lifting winds forgot, resignedly beneath the sky, the melancholy waters lie. No rays from the holy heaven come down on the long night time of that town, but light from out the lurid sea streams up the turrets silently, gleams up the pinnacles far and free, up domes, up spires, up kingly halls, up fanes, up Babylon-like walls, up shadowy long-forgotten bowers of sculptured ivy and stone flowers, up many and many a marvelous shrine whose wreathed friezes intertwine the viol, the violet, and the vine. Resignedly beneath the sky, the melancholy waters lie. So blend the turrets and shadows there that all seem pendulous in the air, while from a proud tower in the town death looks gigantically down. There open fanes and gaping graves yawn level with the luminous waves. Not the riches there that lie in each idol's diamond eye, not the gaily jeweled dead tempt the waters from their bed. For no ripples curl, alas, along that wilderness of glass. No swellings tell that winds may be upon some far-off happier sea. No heavings hint that winds have been on seas less hideously serene. But lo, a stir is in the air. The wave, there is a movement there, as if the towers had thrust aside in sinking slightly the dull tide, as if their tops had feebly given a void within the filmy heaven. The waves have now a redder glow. The hours are breathing faint and low, and when amid no earthly moans down, down that town shall settle hence, hell rising from 1,000 thrones shall do it reverence.
The Black Cat. Mad am I not, and very surely do I not dream, but tomorrow I die, and today I would unburden my soul. My immediately purpose is to place before the world plainly, succinctly, and without comment a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. One night as I sat, half stupefied in a den of more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as our deceased cat Pluto, and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not a single white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite, splotch of white covering nearly the whole region of his breast. Upon my touching him, he immediately arose and purred loudly and rubbed against my hand and appeared delighted with my notice. This then was the very creature of which I was in search. When I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. When it reached the house, it domesticated itself at once and became immediately a great favorite with my wife. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I had anticipated. I know not how or why it was, but by slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature, a certain sense of shame and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty preventing me from physically abusing it. What added, no doubt, to my hatred of the beast was the discovery in the morning after I brought it home that, like our cat Pluto, it had been deprived of one of its eyes. With my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for myself seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with a pertinacity that it would be difficult to make the reader comprehend. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair or spring upon my knees, cover me with its loathsome caresses. If I arose to walk, it would get between my feet, thus nearly throw me down, or fastening its long and sharp claws in my dress, clamber in this manner up to my breast. Oh. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was yet withheld from so doing, partly by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly, and let me confess it at once, by absolute dread of the beast. One day I noticed that on his breast was now the representation of an object that I shudder to name. And for this, above all, I loathed and dreaded and would have rid myself of the monster had I dared. It was now, I say, the image of a hideous, a ghastly thing, of the gallows. A mournful and terrible engine of horror and crime, of agony, death. I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face and its vast weight and incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, incumbent internally upon my heart. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates, the darkest and most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased to hatred of all things, of all mankind. Well, from the sudden, frequent, and ungovernable outbursts of a fury to which I now blindly abandoned myself, my uncomplaining wife, alas, was the most usual and the most patient of sufferers. One day she accompanied me upon some household errand into the cellar of the old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. The cat, of course, followed me down the steep stairs and, nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me to anger. Uplifting an axe, I aimed a blow at the animal, but this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. Goaded by her interference into a rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe into her brain. She fell dead upon the spot without a groan. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith and with entire deliberation to the task of concealing her body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house either by day or by night without the risk of being observed. At one period, I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire. At another, I resolved to dig a grave for it in the floor of the cellar. I deliberated about casting it in the well in the yard, about packing it in a box as if merchandise with the usual arrangements, and so getting a porter to take it from the house. Finally, I hit upon what I considered a far better expedient than any of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages are recorded to have walled up their victims. In one of the walls was a projection caused by a false chimney or fireplace that had been filled up and made to resemble the rest of the cellar. I had no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks at this point insert the corpse, and wall the hole up as before so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. And in this calculation, I was not deceived. And with this, I very carefully went over the new brickwork. I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed, and the rubbish on the floor was picked up with the minutest care. My next step was to look for the beast that had been the cause of so much wretchedness, for I had at length firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet with it at the moment, there could have been no doubt of its fate. But it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of my previous anger and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe or to imagine the deep, blissful sense of relief which the absence of the detested creature occasioned in my bosom. And thus, for one night at least, since its introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept even with the burden of murder upon my soul. Days passed, and the tormentor still came not. The monster in terror had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. What the guilt of my dark deed disturbed me but little. Some few inquiries had been made, but these had been readily answered. Even a search had been instituted, but of course nothing was to be discovered. I looked upon my future felicity as secured. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of the police came unexpectedly into the house and proceeded again to make rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatsoever. The officers bade me accompany them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored, and at length, for the third or fourth time, they descended into the cellar. I quiver not in a muscle. My heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms upon my bosom, and I roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee in my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say for one word by way of triumph to render doubly sure their assurance of my guiltlessness. "Gentlemen," I said at last as the party ascended the steps, "I delight to have allayed your suspicions, and I wish you all health. By the by, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house. I say an excellently well-constructed house. These walls, are you going, gentlemen? Well, these walls are solidly put together. And here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane which I held in my hand upon that very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the ghastly corpse of the wife of my bosom. May God shield and deliver me from the fangs of my arch-fiend. No sooner had the reverberation of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by a voice from within the tomb, by a cry at first muffled and broken like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman, a howl, a wailing, a shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony and of the demons that exalt in their damnation. Of my own thoughts it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall and watched as for one instant the party upon the stairs remained motionless through extremity of terror and awe. In the next instant, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall and fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with red extended mouth and a solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had welled the monster up within the tomb.
And time for a little bit more Poe trivia. Contrary to his story, The Black Cat, which we just heard Bruce do a wonderful reading of, Poe actually adored animals. And what did he name his own black cat? So the name for Poe's own black cat. Take a guess if you don't know. And we may have a special appearance by our own black cat. That is Boo Boo. Boo Boo joining us this evening. And the correct answer is Katerina. We actually have Deb with the answer there. So correct, it is Katerina. Well, coming up next, we do have a few more pieces, and I'm challenging myself to say these correctly tonight after not quite getting through Amontillado last night. We'll hear Eulalie read by Paul, then The Sleeper read by Randy, and The Oval Portrait read by Laura Riley.
Eulalie. I dwelt alone in a world of moan, and my soul was a stagnant tide, till the fair and gentle young Eulalie became my blushing bride, till the yellow-haired young Eulalie became my smiling bride. Ah, less bright the stars of the night than the eyes of the radiant girl, and never a flake that the vapor can make with the moon tints of purple and pearl can vie with the modest Eulalie's most unregarded curl, can compare with the bright-eyed Eulalie's most humble and careless curl. Now doubt, now pain, come never again, for her soul gives me sigh for sigh, while all day long shines bright and strong Astarte within the sky, and ever to her dear Eulalie turns up her matron eye, and ever to her young Eulalie turns up her violet eye.
The Sleeper. At midnight in the month of June, I stand beneath the mystic moon. An opiate vapor, dewy, dim, exhales from out her golden rim, and softly dripping drop by drop upon the quiet mountaintop, steals drowsily and musically into the universal valley. The rosemary nods upon the grave, The lily lolls upon the wave, wrapping the fog about its breast. The ruin molders into rest, looking like leaf. See, the lake, a conscious slumber seems to take, and would not for the world wake. All beauty sleeps, and lo, where lies Irene with her destinies? O lady bright, can it be right, this window open to the night? The wanton airs from the treetop laughingly through the lattice drop. The bodiless airs, a wizard rout, flit through thy chamber in and out, and wave the curtain canopy so fitfully, so fearfully, above the closed and fringed lid, neath which thy slumbering soul lies hid, that o'er the floor and down the wall, like ghosts the shadows rise and fall. O lady dear, hast thou no fear? Why and what art thou dreaming here? Sure, thou art come o'er far off seas, a wonder to these garden trees. Strange is thy pallor, strange thy dress, strange above all thy length of tress, and this all solemn silentness. The lady sleeps. Oh, may her sleep, which is enduring, so be deep. Heaven have her in its sacred keep. This chamber changed for one more holy, this bed for one more melancholy. I pray to God that she may lie forever with unopened eye, while the pale sheeted ghosts go by. My love, she sleeps. Oh, may her sleep, as it is lasting, be so deep. Soft may the worms about her creep. Far in the forest dim and old, for her may some tall vault unfold, some vault that oft hath flung its black and winged panels fluttering back, triumphant o'er the crescent halls of her grand family funerals. Some sepulchre remote, alone, against whose portals she hath thrown in childhood many an idle stone. Some tomb from out whose sounding door she ne'er shall force an echo more. Thrilling to think, poor child of sin, it was the dead who groaned within.
The Oval Portrait. The chateau into which my valet had ventured to make forcible entrance, rather than permit me in my desperately wounded condition to pass the night in the open air, was one of those piles of commingling gloom and grandeur which, to all appearances, it had been temporarily and very lately abandoned. We established ourselves in one of the smallest apartments in a remote turret of the building. Its decorations were rich, yet tattered and antique. Its walls were hung with an unusually great number of very spirited modern paintings, in frames of rich golden arabesque. In these paintings, my incipient delirium perhaps had caused me to take a deep interest, so that I bade Pedro to light the candelabrum which stood by the head of my bed, and to throw open wide the curtains of black velvet which enveloped the bed itself. I wished all this done that I might resign myself, if not to sleep, at least to the contemplation of these pictures, and the perusal of a small volume which had been found upon the pillow, which purported to describe them. Long, long I read, and devotedly I gazed. The hours flew and deep midnight came. The position of the candelabrum displeased me. I placed it so I could throw its rays more fully upon the book, but the rays of the candles now fell within a niche of the room which had been thrown into a deep shade by one of the bedposts. Thus I saw in vivid light a picture unnoticed before. It was the portrait of a young girl just into womanhood. The canvas seemed to dissipate the dreamy stupor and startle me at once into waking life. The portrait, I've already said, it was that of a young girl. It was a mere head and shoulders, done in a vignette manner. The arms and even the ends of her radiant hair melted imperceptibly into the vague yet deep shadow which formed the background of the whole. The frame was oval, richly gilded and filigreed. As a thing of art, nothing could be more admirable than the painting itself, but neither the execution of the work nor the immortal beauty of the countenance had so suddenly and so vehemently moved me. My fancy had mistaken the head for that as a living person. I saw at once that the peculiarities of the design and the vignetting and the frame must have instantly dispelled such an idea. I remained for an hour, perhaps, with my vision riveted upon the portrait. At length, satisfied with the true secret of its effect, I fell back into the bed. I had found the spell of the picture and the absolute lifelikeness of the expression, which, at first startling, finally confounded, subdued, and appalled me. I sought eagerly for the volume which discussed the paintings and their histories. Turning to the number which designated the oval portrait, I there read the vague and quaint words which follow. She was a maiden of rarest beauty, and not more lovely than full of glee. And evil was the hour she saw and loved and wedded the painter. He a passionate, studious, austere, and already having a bride in his art. She all light and smiles, and frolicsome as a young fawn, loving and cherishing all things, hating only the art which was her rival, dreading only the palette and the brushes and the other untoward instruments which deprived her of the countenance of her lover. It was thus a terrible thing for this lady to hear the painter speak of his desire to portray even his young bride. But she was obedient, and sat meekly for many weeks in the dark, high turret chamber. But the painter took glory in his work, which went on from hour to hour and from day to day, and he was a passionate and wild and a moody man, who became lost in his reveries, so that he would not see that the light which fell so ghastly in the lone turret withered the spirits of his bride, who pined visibly to all but him. Yet she smiled on, and still on uncomplainingly, because she saw that the painter took a fervid, burning pleasure in his task, and wrought day and night to depict her who she so loved him. Some who beheld the portrait spoke of its resemblance in low words as a mighty marvel. But at length, as the labor drew nearer its conclusion, there were admitted none to the turret, for the painter had grown wild with the ardor of his work, and turned his eyes from the canvas merely, even to regard the countenance of his wife. And he would not see that the tints which he had spread on the canvas were drawn from the cheeks of her who sat beside him. And when many weeks had passed, and but a little remained to do, save one brush upon the mouth, one tint upon the eye, the spirit of the lady again flickered up as with a flame within the socket of a lamp, and then the brush was given, and then the tint was placed, and for one moment the painter stood entranced with the work which had wrought. But in the next he yet gazed, and grew very pallid, and crying in a loud voice, "This is life indeed," he turned suddenly to regard his beloved, and she was dead.
Thank you, Laura. So we have Anne Van Kuren with us, and we finally got her in and have everything working right now. But we're going to start with the poem that is part of her inspiration and what she's working on, and that is El Dorado. And Bruce Clow will read that here in a moment, and then we'll get Anne on. She'll share a little bit of the work that she's been doing, and that's one of the best things about this kind of work is that we get to work with a variety of people all across the country and in different formats and things like that, which is going to be my last trivia setup question. And here we go. So Poe was considered a literary trailblazer, specifically in 3 genres. He's considered to be the inventor of one and an innovator in the other 2. And I will take any of the 3 answers as our trivia. So this is our last one for the evening. Let's see what's happening. Roger has one of them. Deb has one. Constanza has one. Look at you guys. You got them all, right? So we have detective stories. We have science fiction, mystery fiction, and horror. And those are the three. Very good. So I will be sending you a little text here in a second and asking you what prizes you would like. So let's bring Bruce out and hear El Dorado.
El Dorado. Gaily bedight, a gallant knight in sunshine and in shadow had journeyed long, singing a song in search of El Dorado. But he grew old, this knight so bold, and o'er his heart a shadow fell as he found no spot of ground that looked like El Dorado. And as his strength failed him at length, he met a pilgrim shadow. Shadow, said he, where can it be, this land of El Dorado? Over the mountains of the moon, down the valleys of the shadow, ride, boldly ride, the shade replied, if you seek for El Dorado.
So I'm going to ask Anne to bring up her camera and join us now. There she is. Yay. Oh, she was. She's back. Yay. I actually haven't seen her in that face in a while.
Yeah.
So welcome. I'm going to turn it over to you. And when you're ready to share your screen, it's all set up. Just go ahead and do that.
Okay. So what I've been doing is I had some ideas for El Dorado and working with creating images. So I've been rehearsing with dancers over Zoom. We've been having Zoom rehearsals and socially distancing, videotaping themselves. And then I also went on site to get some videotape as well. And I've been sort of playing with putting these images together like I would a piece of choreography. And I am not a film director, so I'm coming from it as a choreographer, and this is really a work in progress. I'm looking at how El Dorado, which was at the end of Edgar Allan Poe's life in that last year, how he was looking back at his life, where you start out looking for the riches, just like the knights of old, looking for that golden city on the hill, and never, thinking they have it, and then no, it's not here, looking there, and really realizing what they left behind and living with that regret, and even thinking of it from the standpoint of those that were left behind, hearing, maybe in writing from their loved one who they realize may never return before they meet up in the next world. So I'm just sharing this work in progress, and hopefully towards the little bit later in the year, we'll get to see a final version of it. Here goes.
De tudo, o meu amor seria atento antes, com tal zelo, sempre e tanto, que mesmo em face do maior encanto, dele se encante mais meu pensamento. Quero vivê-lo em cada vão momento, em seu louvor, hei de espalhar meu canto, e rir meu riso, derramar meu pranto, o seu pesar ou o seu contamento. E assim, quando mais tarde me procure, quem sabe a morte, a angústia de quem vive, quem sabe a solidão fim de quem ama, eu posso lhe dizer do amor que tive, que não seja imortal, posto que chama, mas que seja infinito enquanto dure.
Cynthia, your mic isn't on. We can't hear you.
Ah, thanks. Hey, I do it at the end of the night every single broadcast. You think I'm going to need to put one of those big things up there that says turn your mic on at the end. So Anne is planning on doing a full production of Poe's work on his birthday on January 19th, and some of us will be joining her. So we'll hear more from her on that. Everyone is sending me little notes. Okay, I'll check those here in a second. So we're going to end up the evening with the Telltale Heart, and I'm going to ask the company to come online with us. So come on the screen. And then after the Telltale Heart, for our ending credits, I'm going to run Mask of the Red Death, a film from our high school students in New Jersey, which is about a 6-minute film. And then we're going to follow that with the professional film, The Man of the Crowd from Van Dance. And that will close out our evening. And thank you for spending a huge portion of your All Hallows Eve and Halloween here with us this evening. We started at 2 o'clock. So there are a huge number of Telltale Heart videos, like 6 or 7, I think I've got up right now, as well as some other small videos on the Tempest website. And we are looking for more. So anyone out there that wants to make a video and send it to us, do it. And thank you for joining us with Poe. And here we end with the Telltale Heart.
It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold, I had no desire. I think it was his eye.
Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. Cold, mad, murder. And so by degrees, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him.
And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in.
I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my whole head was well within the room, I undid the lantern cautiously.
Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just as midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye.
And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. Upon the 8th night, it was more than unusually cautious in opening the door.
A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could hardly contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts.
I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, and I knew that he could not see the opening of the door. I kept pushing it on steadily.
I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall.
Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was a groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no, it was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew that sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom.
Deepening with its dreadful echo, the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not.
Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. I waited a long time. I resolved to open the lantern.
At length, a simple dim ray, like the thread of the spider, fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over acuteness of the sense? Now, I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage.
I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates a soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eve.
Meanwhile, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder in every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you I am nervous. So I am.
And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder, louder. I thought the heart must burst.
And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leapt into the room. He shrieked once, only once.
In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and I pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for so many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. At length, It ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes.
There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you think me mad, you'll think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs.
Then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all.
When I'd made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police.
A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and the officers had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear?
I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed him his treasures, secure, undisturbed.
In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat, and still they chatted.
The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice.
Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much like a sound a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I rose and argued about trifles in a high key with a violent gesticulation, but the noise steadily increased.
Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards.
But the noise arose over all, continually increased. It grew louder, louder, louder. The men chatted pleasantly. They smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no, they heard. They suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror.
I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart.
The Red Death had long devastated the country.
No petulance had ever been so fatal.
Or so hideous.
Blood was its avatar and its seal.
There were sharp pains.
It with sudden dizziness.
And then profuse bleeding at the pores.
The scarlet stains upon the body.
Especially upon the face.
Shut the victims out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellowmen. The whole progress and termination of the disease were incidents of half an hour.
But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his abbeys.
Strong and lofty wall girdled it in.
This wall had gates of iron.
The courtiers brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts.
It is resolved to leave means neither of ingress nor egress to the sudden impulses of despair or a frenzy from within. The external world can take care of itself. In the meantime, it is folly to grieve or to think. I have provided all the appliances of pleasure.
Buffoons.
Improvisatory.
Ballet dancers.
Musicians.
Beauty.
Wine. All of the and security were within, without expected.
It was toward the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, all the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence.
The rooms in which it was held were 7.
But very different to other places as might be expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre.
In the middle of each window stayed a tall and narrow Gothic window.
These windows are stained glass whose color varies in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber. The first chamber was
blue,
and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was
purple
in its ornaments and tapestries. The third was
green.
The fourth was furnished with
orange.
The fifth with
white.
The sixth with
violet.
The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in
black.
But in this chamber, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were
scarlet,
a deep blood color.
It was a voluptuous scene, the masquerade, a gay and magnificent revel. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked a multitude of dreams.
But none were bold enough to set foot within the precincts of the Black Chamber.
And it was in the Black Chamber that there stood a gigantic ebony clock.
Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang.
And when the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the ebony clock a sound which was clear, loud, deep, and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar notes and emphasis that the musicians of the orchestra paused their performance, and the waltzers ceased their evolutions. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. The revel went whirlingly on, until there commenced the sounds of the midnight upon the clock.
But before the last echoes of the last chime sunk into silence, the revelers became aware of the presence of a masked figure.
There arose from the whole company a murmur of surprise,
horror,
disgust,
and finally, terror.
The figure was tall, gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the vestiges of the grave. The mask which concealed the face resembled the countenance of a stiffened corpse. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror.
The masked figure, with a slow and solemn movement, stalked to and fro among the waltzers. As the figure passed, each waltzer fell silent and still, as if precious life was being drained like blood from their veins. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon the spectral image, he was seen to shudder with either terror or distaste. But then his brow reddened with rage.
Who dares? Who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise.
But none were found who would put forth their hand to seize him. The vast assembly shrank from the centers of the room so that the masked figure passed unimpeded, I made the way with a solemn and measured step through the blue chamber to the purple.
From the purple to the green.
Through the green to the orange.
Through the orange to the white.
Through the white to the left.
It was then that Prince Prospero, maddening with rage, bore aloft a drawn dagger and rushed through the 6 chambers, one unfollowed on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all.
The masked figure, having reached the black chamber, stood erect and motionless with the shadow of the ebony clock.
The dagger dropped, gleaming upon the sable carpet, and beside it, prostrating in death, the Prince Prospero.
Summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers threw themselves into the black chamber and gasped in unutterable horror at the finding of the grave cerements and corpse-like mask untenanted by any tangible form.
Now the rebellers acknowledged the true identity of the masked intruder.
And one by one they dropped in the blood-bejeweled chambers of their revel, and the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last, and the flames expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held dominion over all.
I don't know if any of my company's still out there, if they want to pop on and say hi and bye.
That was excellent. I loved it.
Mike, I've made it so you can talk. Same with Roger, if you want to say hi to us.
I'm still here.
I'm
I
going to
broke
stop
into
the
the fruit
sharing on
snacks, but I'm
Facebook
still
though,
here.
okay?